The first thing I'd like to do is just sort of introduce everybody, and particularly can I introduce Kwok. Kat, do you want to say just a little bit about what your role is in OCSLD?
Oh, yeah. Well, I am an educational researcher, and I work most closely with the ed devs at OCSLD. So
That's
I've been,
me and Mary Dean.
yeah.
And
So I've been tasked to do kind of research on things that the university is interested in, like PGT satisfaction and the attainment gap and all those sorts of things. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm George Roberts. I'm a principal lecturer in student experience in OCSLD, the Staff and Learning Development Department. Kat's kindly put my name on that first, but neither alphabetically nor anything to do. All the good bits are hers. Anything that didn't quite work, I'll happily take credit for. So I think what we wanted to do is frame it up in terms of these two questions, thinking that lunch might arrive and people would be starting to mumble their sandwiches, and it might be helpful to say, in your experience, just to first, you could think amongst yourselves, and if people come in late, we can frame that there, but if you wanted to speak in convenient, I think, groups is fine. So the convenient groups, and is it Mumbicroft, but the first name was? Kathy Mumbicroft, if you wanted to, either probably
Yeah.
to.
Psychologist.
Brilliant. And I think I see lunch arriving right now, or at least probably the food on it. So while you're eating your lunch, in your experience, where do students need the most support in completing their dissertation projects? And which aspects or responsibilities of being a supervisor have you found to be more challenging than others? What would support these for areas of what would support for these areas look like? And make a few notes and be prepared to discuss and over lunch. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll just kind of quickly go over the P-test items and how the faculties have done and how HLS has done. So I'm sure you're aware the P-test is a national survey for PGT student satisfaction. They look at several areas of the PGT student experience, one of which is on dissertation satisfaction. So there are 4 items on the P-test on the screen here that look at dissertation satisfaction. The first is I understand required standards for the dissertation or project. The second is I am happy with the support I receive for planning my dissertation or project. The third is my supervisor has the skills and subject knowledge to adequately support my dissertation or project. And the last item is my supervisor provides helpful feedback on my progress. So briefly, if we look at how all the four faculties did on the P-test, so this table shows the range of scores for the departments within each faculty. And the percentage satisfied corresponds to the percentage of students for each department, how many of them indicated that they were satisfied in those areas. So you can see, apart from HSS, and also, departments with less than 10 responses have been omitted. So you can see HSS only has 2 departments in there. But anyway, you can see that generally there is a kind of a spread of scores between the departments, even within a faculty. And with some items, there's more variation than on others.
I'm sorry, can I just...
Yeah.
So N equals the number of students who completed it?
Say that again, sorry? It's at department level. So, for instance, for the first item for HLS, 65 to 88 indicates that of all the departments included in HLS, so there was one department that got 65, another one got 88, and the rest fell between that.
Okay,
Yeah.
N equals the number of...
Departments.
The number of departments, sorry, yes, the number of departments included, because departments with fewer than 10 responses have been omitted. So that's sort of to tell, yeah. Okay, so looking at HLS specifically, the highest satisfaction was found for item 3, for supervisor expertise, and 80% of respondents from HLS indicated that they were satisfied in this area. The items with lower levels of satisfaction were items 1 and 2, which pertain to understanding the required standards and planning support received, where item 1 received 76% satisfaction for HLS overall, and item 2 received 67% satisfaction for HLS overall. So research on students and staff experiences with the dissertation process have found that the start of the dissertation process is an important period for supervisor support. So some examples of important tasks that should be accomplished during this time include establishing project timelines, checking student understanding of the purpose of each section in a dissertation or report, and managing student expectations. Expectations specifically pertaining to, firstly, supervision style. So, for example, if you prefer to adopt a reactive supervision style, where essentially the onus is on the student to come in with specific questions or to bring in work that they've done for you to then react to, as opposed to a more proactive style where you would proactively offer suggestions to the student, for instance. So your expectations regarding how you want to give feedback and what type of feedback you will give should be clarified at the beginning stage with the student. And the second expectation that would be ideally explicitly discussed would be on the expected level of their independence and how this might change as well during as the dissertation progresses. So for instance, would you expect them to become more independent as their dissertation progresses or not? And that's it, yeah. So bear in mind the value of framing these expectations positively. So to a student, telling them that they are expected to become increasingly independent might sound to them like you're saying, I'm not going to give you the support that you might be expecting. So there's value in framing these expectations positively. For instance, by emphasizing that your priority is on them becoming independent researchers. Some other considerations beyond the beginning stages of the dissertation is on the use of partly structured sessions that explicitly and systematically guide students to apply their academic skills to their projects. So, for example, you could structure a few sessions to be around, let's say, like the student bringing in some research that they've read and to get them to critique it or things like that, and to highlight that these are the skills that they should be showing in their dissertations. Another consideration would be on the supply and demand of dissertation support and what that would look like throughout the project. So the reason for this is to kind of identify where the student might need more support or might need less support and so on and so forth, because obviously these things are very dependent from student to student and across subject area as well. So to consider the supply and demand of support in this way would be a kind of first step in identifying how supervision might be better done, I suppose. Yeah. A final consideration would be for a forum for sharing experiences and best practice with colleagues. So a lot of research into kind of supervisors' perspectives of the dissertation experience have found that kind of supervising can be quite an isolating experience. So there's not really any avenues where staff can kind of share best practice and reflect on their practice with each other. So this is a final consideration that this might be of use to people who are supervisors. So we go back again to our questions to see if there are any added insights or additional points that you have. And I think we'll wrap up the...
Thank you very much. I certainly heard ethics coming up from both sides of the room as we were speaking. And very simplistically, when Kat and I were speaking at the beginning, we have this sort of, in three places, at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And how that's structured usefully is sometimes hard to say. And is different, I find, in full-time versus, so what aspects of responsibilities are found to be challenging. Sometimes it's the timeline of the full-time 1 year MSc, MA, as opposed to the 2 year or 3 year part-time route that some people take. Having a mixture of people on both of those and getting individual timelines and university timelines and professional requirements at the right place. I don't know what for your experience. I mean, how is it for everybody else?
Can I just go back to the P-test? So is it possible to get a breakdown of the figures, how many students filled it in and what the differences were between the different departments?
Between departments, yes. I haven't seen... Oh yes, definitely, I think you can get... on the SBPO website it should be available.
On the
SBPO, the Strategic Business, yeah.
Great,
The
okay.
dates should be definitely.
I mean, the answer is they need it all the way through. It's all challenging for them the whole way through, isn't it? It's hard, can't really say which bit is more challenging.
I think partly it depends on the area of work, because obviously within healthcare there are more ethics issues. Within the area I've done, mainly it's not been ethics, it's actually expertise, because they may have been looking at areas which are outside the expertise of other academics, and so it's quite difficult to provide them with advice. So I think a lot of it depends on the area which the students are working in.
I think a lot of students struggle to realise the standard that is required. I mean, we struggle to get our students to think deeply about stuff. There's a big tendency to do a sort of surface approach, and getting them to really dig deeper to where they should be at master's level is difficult. I think they need a lot of guidance, and if the supervisor doesn't engage with that with them in helping them with the analysis.
Can I write some things on the board while you're talking? Would that be okay, Mary?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I just want to write. No, have a way of capturing this a little bit. So, ethics and expertise, range of expertise is what you, in order to, because of the professional and the requirements of the students.
Well, my point was about getting students to study in depth enough.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
It's knowing what is
What is
dissertation,
in what's
required
enough.
of them,
Yeah.
because they've never, I mean, something that they've never done, and unsurprisingly, they haven't got really.
They
most of them
haven't,
don't.
but we all did it, didn't we? I mean, you know, they haven't, but.
But it's a learning on the job.
How they look at past
But obviously it is harder than we think it is, because they getting them to really engage at that deeper level that's needed. But I'm at a loss to how to explain that, because I think I do, and you know.
So you carry a lot of tacit knowledge about how you do it, or I carry a lot of tacit knowledge in how I do it, and don't always make that explicit at a time when it's useful for the student, because I don't notice it, because is it that kind of experience?
I think, yeah, I guess it is. I guess it is.
I've read something about the fact that the majority of feedback that we give them is quite superficial.
So we're being superficial as well.
Just so you know, say, don't say that, say this.
Yes, exactly.
rather, it's often more challenging. You know, I often say, but what does this mean? And I think I suspect that that's the big question that's hitting the glacial.
I think so, because when supervisors say this needs rewording, I'm not sure that's helpful. They don't see what it is that it. But short of rewriting it for them, it's very difficult to get that balance. But perhaps they underestimate it. Any draft needs to be rewritten 3 or 4 times. Why are we not spelling that out?
But also, the time to say this needs rewording is in the development stage, isn't it? And if you wrote a comment like that, you'd have a conversation about what you meant by that in your supervision session. And the time to write that is part by the time you actually submit.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I mean, we're quite lucky in healthcare in some ways, because the students are enrolled on a programme that usually spans 2 to 3 years, so you can have that longer running, whereas some of the masters in the faculty are 1 year full-time, bang, and they've just got to do it all in one go. And the thing about, of course, master studies is that it's all at level 7, so in some ways you're not expecting a step up, but because we've got this longer running, perhaps we should treat it a bit more how we would treat academic progression and extended induction for undergraduate programmes between levels 4, 5 and 6, and really sort of spend some time.
Treat it like there actually is the progression that there is, rather than saying it's all
like
level
into
7. And
project mode, and if you had the time, you'd probably want to sort of really support them into that way of working and thinking, and that's a luxury that's not available across all the programmes in the faculty because of the nature of them.
yeah.
And I don't think we do it that way. We do a certain amount, don't we? We do lots of prep sessions and stuff, but.
And there's a lot of other stuff to do.
And they're very, very busy, the healthcare students, because they've got whacking great practice expectations as well.
I think there's one thing, if we take it back to the beginning in terms of expectations.
Right.
This is probably the major piece of work they're going to do in their study, and they do come up with some. I mean, I come from mental health, but more specifically from the forensic speciality, where there are students that will come, have ideas where they want to do their project, but you have to balance this between they need to complete a program here,
Right.
and they're very much inspired by certain ideas or something that they want to do, but the feasibility, you have to think about balancing this. This is what you need to get done within that time,
Yeah.
and at the same time, you don't want them to shy away from things, some certain areas, certain issues. That means a lot to them, and they really, it's very meaningful, something they really want to. We're talking about service improvement and all that. They want to make a difference. They want to really to contribute something here, but it's balancing that is the difficulty.
Some kind of engagement.
So can I ask, in those applied contexts, are your students doing literature reviews, or are they doing applied research? Or
Both at the moment.
both?
There was something else that came up at the beginning about guidance, and maybe that is, but it's about the timing and when. It's the when or where, and it's easy to say all the way through and spot that there are different cycles that go along. How do you actually achieve the induction, the successful induction that sort of puts them on the right path, if you like?
They have to have had that built into their programme. It should be that they should be able to run with it, having had the appropriate research training up until then. So it is all a continuum.
Yeah. Some experience that I've had is finding out quite late in the process that I'm going to be supervising a student for whatever internal reasons there may have been. You occasionally pick somebody up only a few months before it's due, rather than having been a part of the process, because that process may have begun 2 years ago or something like that, and there's a continuity, or the process may have been accelerated at such a speed that people weren't there at the time, didn't get brought on board until later than they should have been. So getting that supervisor involved in the conversation at the very beginning of a sort of, as it were, a 3-semester program is really important. And if the supervisor, let's hypothesize, so imagine they start in September, and the supervisor, you might not know until Christmas or even after Christmas that you're going to be supervising somebody who is then going to be starting to write at Easter and then be finished, and having those conversations quickly enough and that accelerating. I'm seeing some nods.
Well, that's why I see the distinction between the undergrad and postgrad.
Yeah.
You were making a similar point. And with our undergrads, you get assigned in the summer beforehand. You invariably will know some of them. Postgrad, masters, they don't know you. The first semester, they're rushing through, they're panicking, they're getting, in our case, acclimatized to an entirely new discipline. And they've got to come up with formulate a new idea. I think that it's incredible to keep the shit together, basically, for all the stuff that's going on.
It's a technical term, yeah.
I think the point about expectations, I sometimes get. I agree with you. I also frustrate them again because we asked them to do empirical work, come up with a journal article, and the example of those. Every journal article they've ever read, that's the format, that's what we're looking for. So it's a case of, I sometimes get a bit frustrated with that because it's there. Every report, they don't put it 2 and 2 together and work out, oh, that's what you want me to do. Even though we tell them that that's exactly what they want to do.
But one debate that we were having the other day was that, so there's 2 ways of getting a question, isn't there? Either your supervisor gives you a question from their body of work, and great. The disadvantage is that you might not have any interest in it whatsoever, but at least it's a question. The other way is that students pick their own question, and if they're given a question, the advantage is they know it's a workable, it'll work as a question. Whereas if they pick their own, that's where they really need guidance, because, and I think sometimes we don't give enough at that stage, because quite often when problems come to me as a module leader at the end, the question's a rubbish question and it hasn't been picked up. And I think we often neglect to, if they're choosing their own question, to really work with them in depth at that time. And we kind of, you know, there's an equal amount of time. If they're given a question from their supervisor, it will be fine. If they make one up, it will need a lot of work. So we, and I don't know if we always put in enough time at the beginning to make sure that, because there's nothing worse than coming in at the end and just thinking, no, how can they possibly be going with this? Because no one spent the time with them at the beginning to work out the question.
I'm not sure that's always the case, though. I think we do spend time with them at the beginning, but sometimes they decide that they're going to answer a different question.
Right, okay, yeah.
But can I also just want to drop in what I've heard in other conversations of a third way, not a way in between, but something different yet again, is that they come from their employer with a question that their employer has given them to answer, or an area that their employer has asked them to address, which may or may not challenge the local expertise, may or may not challenge the ethic, you know, but it just adds at least a dimension of complexity. I saw you nodding, Julia.
Well, only as much as that, yes, we have got agreement with our local practice partners that the service improvement project should be on something that the postgraduate students can do. So that there's a potential for that, certainly.
I think I always find my priority is always to give them the lead in deciding their question. Because if I find if you give them a project, they just won't engage. It's my project, not theirs. And so, but it depends. Because I'm trying to do research on this myself, and what are we assessing here? Because if you give them the project,
Yes, and also give them a good supervisor, and the supervisor will do it, but not do it for them. But you know, how much is it their work, and how much is it the supervisor's?
but implicitly, you read a paper, you often are, aside from its empirical worth, you're going, oh, this is original. Are we assessing its originality, or are we assessing their research skills? And I think we sometimes, as researchers, also value originality in the same way, but our students may not. Like, they need the skills, they need to be able to write something up. But in the back of my mind, if it's a novel finding, all my lights are flashing, going, this is cool, I'm interested in it. But if they do something original and it fails, and then, although I don't think they understand a lot of the time that non-skippable findings is not, it's okay.
Yeah.
And thank you. I don't know if there's an easy answer to it, but I certainly. That's why I often want them to do their own, because I want to find their excitement. I think the nuance to it is if they know what they're going to do afterwards. Because if I know that someone wants to go and do a PhD, I would want in their circumstances of them going to an application process saying, this is my project, not my supervisor. And I think it's finding the halfway house.
Yeah, and I'm making the link between, from the master's to the PhD. From a PhD supervisor's perspective, you would really like to know what they've gotten out of the master's. And sometimes there's a direct link, and sometimes it's 5 years, 10 years later. And a whole different set of requirements kick in. I've built a bit of a list. I haven't put a timeline on it, but just sort of thinking about reporting back and how do we actively, what actively needs to be done to address these if these are issues. The ethics timing of ethics committees, is that's certainly been expressed as a problem. I heard that over before we actually started talking.
Well, we now have to have students can't go through themselves. They have to go through with the supervisor has to be the principal investigator. Is that the same?
We have to sign off on it.
But a student can take a project through ethics, can they themselves?
But
We have-
it's already done on it.
We have an internal board.
Yeah,
Yeah,
faculty, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
a bit odd.
Yeah, you're all in the same faculty.
It's not.
And there's the faculty or university.
But they don't do faculty ethics. Why? Because it's not patients, it's students.
Yeah.
It's not faculty ethics, it's just about patients.
So we
No.
vet our own.
So how come you don't go to faculty ethics?
Because those are in accordance with British Psychological Society.
Okay.
So they fill in a long ethics form, which is the same as the one that would go to your level, but they're approved internally.
Okay.
But the supervisor has to sign off on them.
Well,
It goes through an internal review as well,
Yeah.
that is internal.
So we've got processes that are different in different.
Yeah, humanities and social sciences has their own light touch ethics form for level 7, PG cert masters, which is, it basically follows the same process, but signed off internally.
Yeah, we have, so our undergraduate second years
Yeah.
have a very light touch. Basically, if you can tick no to this bunch of questions, then it can just be signed off by the module leader.
Yeah.
It doesn't even reach the internal committee. And it used to be that for the dissertation students, depending on the nature of their studies,
Yeah.
it could do that, or one of these might be a yes, in which case it would go
So
through the
it's-
longer process. But we decided for parity that actually they should all go through the slightly longer process.
So this is an aside to this session, but we haven't got faculty processes that are equal across the departments, have we? Which is for student equity. That's quite a consideration, isn't it? But that's aside from here. But it's an interesting byproduct.
But okay,
That-
yeah, equality across
Yeah, we should have. It should be equally.
onerous.
Yeah.
Yes, for all, shouldn't
So does
it?
that mean if you're the PI that you're in charge of?
So
do you
for
write-
me-
do you write the
Yes. So for
Oh,
me,
right.
if I want, if a student wants to do a study, they have to persuade me to take it through our faculty ethics. So they would write, essentially, if it's their thing and I'm not that interested, they would write it. But I then have to take it through and have myself as principal investigator. So all the flat comes back to me, not the students. But that's for whatever type of project. If it's like I've got one who she wants to look at volunteer people in a particular support group, so potentially it's low risk, it should be low risk, but I have to take that through. So that's a lot of work for the supervisor.
So how many students do things
Not
that
very
require
many.
editing?
Not if you've any sense as a supervisor, you direct them towards literature reviews because they're half the amount of work.
Because in our case, all of them do that.
Yeah.
So then we would have 100 students filling the,
Yeah.
I don't think
100
that you would
undergrads
equal.
and 30 postgrads.
Yeah. But for us, the ones that you have that are doing empirical work, I mean, I keep doing it. I'm not learning, but they are so much more work than a literature review.
But maybe it would be a bit less work if
Yeah, it
you
would.
could follow
Mm.
our ethics procedures.
Particularly when they don't involve patients and they're very low risk.
Yeah.
I mean, patients, it's different. It's totally different.
But we do seem to have a particularly onerous
Yeah.
But
system.
our ethics procedure can involve children
Mm.
and it can involve vulnerable
Vulnerable people.
populations,
Yeah, well, yes.
but not NHS.
Wasn't it still, and it's still treated the same quite light touch?
Well,
Not
it's
very
not
touch.
the, it then would definitely be a yes on one of the very
Yeah.
light touch things, but yeah, it can be dealt with internally.
So it's almost as if they have to always write a draft project in their ethics.
Yeah, a research proposal.
Yeah.
proposal.
Which
So it's
it
always
is
part of the
useful. It's
assessment
useful.
process.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
there's no doubt that it gets them thinking about all the right things.
No,
No. Supposed to. Yes. Again,
Thinking, yeah, right things. Not
another opinion in the room.
But I think the thing about time management is because ethics, so I try and tell them, get it done by a certain, but because there's so much wiggle room within the space of those 3 semesters, like if you're working with kids, like so Naili worked with kids in her project, you have to get that through really quickly. So you often find the experimental work gets done really quickly. I do questionnaire work and you can basically pull that out of the bag in the last 3 or 4 months. And there's a huge variation, and I think that has a huge impact on your outcome because a lot of people just think, oh, there's no deadline. There's no deadline for the ethics. You can leave that, and it can screw up the entire project because you've left it and left it and left it and left it. And as supervisor, you have no power to enforce anything. Even if you know, being a benevolent kind of paternal this is going to be wrong, you're going to screw yourself over doing this. You can do nothing. Even though you can write emails to you blue in your face, and they still don't. So that's what I have to find. The students who fail just don't engage, and they just see the absence of hard deadlines as a green light to do nothing.
Yeah, this year in the undergrad dissertations, there were 2 projects, one survey, one experiment, which basically I put the finishing touches to a week before the date of the dissertation deadline. Because I hadn't heard from the students for months.
Oh. So the challenging thing for me is the willful not failure to engage.
That's independent learning thing.
Independent learning equals willful failure to engage. No.
That's what prompted me to do this research in the first place, because I'm doing some studies on these things. Because when I first started here, I thought, everyone's going to find this interesting. Everyone's going to get excited about this. This is the best part of your undergraduate and postgraduate course. And it blew my mind that some of them just didn't. It's like this is the one opportunity you get to exercise some autonomy and get in depth. And it just blew my mind that some students just go. And now I've acclimatized to that, but it's a.
But do some of them not? Some of them get it.
Some of them get them. Some they're a joy to supervise, but it just blows my mind how.
You see, we do it well at undergraduate level. We do it really well at undergrad level, and they get it. The vast majority, when they do a lit review, the vast majority are buzzing at or a proposal, and they get it, and they suddenly, that's what and so that's brilliant. But we don't do it so well at postgrad level, and it's a shame that what we do well at undergrad, it's much harder. And so maybe they're the same as that, but it is odd. But they do get it at undergrad level.
The thing that worries me about this is that I recognise the student traits you're describing, and I'm not disputing your experience. But I would also recognise the same traits in students in other faculties. And in fact, when I was based in other faculties, if anything, I felt that students were less motivated to work for their courses than they are in an HLS. An HLS scores consistently worse on dissertation supervision than other faculties. So there's something going on that doesn't really rhyme in this. So, when I dealt with architecture students, they were perfectly happy to spend all of their time on the model and never write anything. But they seem to give better feedback on their dissertation supervision than HLS students do. So whether it's that we don't tap into their enthusiasm in the right way, or that our dissertation is angled at the wrong, they don't want to be academics, they want to be practitioners, it's something like that.
Can I throw something into
that
mix? Because I've obviously supervised, but I teach a module which is incredibly employability focused, where project teams have to produce consultancy reports. And every year they're incredibly engaged in it, and there is never any problems with deadlines or anything like that, and they do the work, and even though they're working in groups, which can be fraught anyway, there's an element sometimes when I talk to students is that they're much more interested in stuff which has a real world kind of outcome of inevitability, employability, something which they can see because they've got clients they're working for. And I think sometimes they find that difficult with more academic dissertation-based stuff.
Our dissertations are incredibly practical. We get them to look at a practice-based, there is nothing more practical than a good dissertation in healthcare, and even still they don't.
And this won't cover all the areas, because I realise that for some areas like nursing, it is, the whole point of it is that it's very applied. I'm just aware that my students, when they ask me how to write reports, I actually tell them to forget everything they've learned for the last 3 years at Brooks. I'm sorry, I do that because they've been taught how to write academic reports, and when they leave Brooks, they won't write academic reports. They'll be writing things like consultancy reports and science writing, whatever it is they go into. Generally, the academic style they won't use. I'm sorry, it's just that's not what happens in most business and consultancy and stuff like that. There is a real tension there.
I see it in writing policy, education policy, where people come into, and I teach a course which is about the practice of writing education policy, and they don't write academic papers and they don't get it. And they find it hard. spotted that one.
Yeah, and it's a real issue, and students recognise that actually some of the stuff they've been asked to do, they don't necessarily feel it's that, I'm being fairly brutal, that relevant. Moving on from university setting, they kind of go, well, okay, fine, I've been trained to do this, but actually I'm going to leave and do something completely different in some ways. Probably
They might not
because
get it for the discipline. There's a lot of difference in disciplinary specific academic writing. So we have a lot of postgraduate students who enter the master's route for the healthcare programmes. And for example, if they've got masters in the biosciences, they really struggle with a different type of disciplinary specific writing for sort of like the more sort of social science side of nursing and healthcare. So it is about horses for courses, isn't it? The worrying thing about what you're saying is that all these programmes have been approved with an employability strand, which has been externally reviewed, validated, and assessments looked at in terms of their applicability to the real world, which makes us suggest we're doing something wrong.
Well, I guess we're forcing people to move into different career strands that have different
Yeah, I think
requirements.
and
We shouldn't be producing
no, that's right.
homogenous students.
No, and I think it's fine, but as long as we recognise as transferable skills, but I don't think we should be damning our programmes and saying that we're not doing the right thing, because if our programmes really are that bad, we ought to do something about it.
no, I'm not Julie. I'm not. It's just that obviously they have to write reports for clients.
Yes.
It's
And
about
so
the expectations.
I have to basically say, look, I don't want you doing this, this, and this. I want you doing this. So I'm slightly blasé. I forget everything you've done. Although I do think that there is an element sometimes is that because many of the academic staff are academically trained and qualified, there isn't quite so much of the element of
real world.
just applying that and moving on, thinking, right, what's going to happen after you leave? What are you going to need to do? How are you going to need to function? What kind of expectations your employers are going to have on you, and how does that differ from what we've told you how to do things? Sorry.
Thank you. No, I think that's a really important point, and a useful place, I guess, to again observe the time and sort of offer the opportunity to wrap it up around that. I don't want to. I'm happy that we stay for as long as there's sandwiches and coffee and so on, and continue to speak more informally. But I just want to, if anybody needs to go, to give them the opportunity to. If we don't, you have a lot of marking to do. we have. That's one of the things we haven't talked about actually is the actual marking of the supervision of the dissertation. Anyway. Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on. Sorry. Just for can I thank Kat? Sorry, Jan. Just for 1 second, I just want to thank and acknowledge the work that Kat did to start this conversation.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry for leaving
early. No, you're absolutely right. I just didn't want to forget. Thank you, Kat. Thank you very much.